Nurgle's children, our sweetest, our favourites. How much Nergal loves his children, how much Nergal loves his little darlings. The insane scribblings written in the entrails of a still living man. Nurglings are the very image of Father Nergal himself, having friendly, mischievous faces and bloated, green bodies fitted with disproportionate limbs. The only difference is their size. A Nurgling is no taller than a foot high. These foul things inhabit the bodies of larger demons, preferably the great unclean ones who spawn them. Nurglings creep into the crevices, burying themselves beneath the diseased flab of their bulky forms, and suckle on the cancerous wounds that weep foul pus. While covering their host, they jockey for the favour of their master, purring with pleasure when caressed, or squealing with delight when offered a choice morsel of flesh. Even as disgusting as they are, nothing compares to how they are often created. A Nurgling grows in the rotting flesh of a great unclean one. Like infants, they feed on the nutrients of the mother, though in this case it is the rancid milk of pestilence. In time, a diet of filth enables the Nurgling to grow large enough to allow it to eat its way out of the wet innards, born to whatever horrid existence it faces. Queerly, great unclean ones tend to see these vermin as their children. They coddle them, coo at them, and caress them, showering them with affection. Though such endearments are no obstacle to the greater demon's tantrums and bottomless hunger, many Nurglings rot away, get caught between the demon's prodigious toes, or are dissolved in its gastric juices. Nurglings are also bred from the pus shed by great unclean ones. As these massive, bloated fiends walk the land, they leave a swath of oily filth in their wake. The fluid collects in sticky pockets, lying in wait for the hapless passerby who has the misfortune to dip his foot in the morass. The foulness enters the victim's body, travelling through the blood to lodge inside of the abdomen where it grows, feeding on the body's excrement. In time, when it is large enough, it distends its host's belly and cries out insults and profanities as much and as loudly as it can. It eventually grows tired of such behavior and travels out through the mouth or anus, depending on its mood, to be free and seek its fortune in the world. Such experiences, whilst terrifyingly unpleasant and maddening, are never lethal, just very uncomfortable. Such Nurglings may look for others of their kind, they are indeed social creatures, but many content themselves in the filth and squalor of human cities, feasting on offal piles, sewers, and the like. But from time to time, the Nurgling will seek its original human host out of some strange affection, to visit a plague as a means of gratitude. When faced with an enemy, they advance in a furious swarm, clawing and gnawing at the foe's legs, biting his ankles, and licking at any interesting sores or abrasions they discover. Their tiny teeth are as sharp as razors, leaving festering little bites upon their victims, but rarely killing them outright. Although such an attack can prove to be the beginning of a long, disease-ridden demise, as something nasty takes root in the wound. The end. Smallpox, big pox, chicken pox, pig pox, diseases of the elementary kind, unease of the elementary kind, common cold, influenza, nasty rash, distemper, pneumonia bubonica, from the plague bearers. The plague bearers, known also as the tainted ones, the one-eyed rotters, the horned rotbacks, the maggotkin, the rot-bearers, and the tallymen of plagues, are the rank and file of Nurgle's legions, crafted from the soul stuff of mortals who have been slain by Nurgle's rot. What little of the plague-bearer's skin that can be seen beneath the discharge of innumerable sores is tinged with suppuration greens and vile browns. Pus weeps continuously from its single bloodshot eye, and from the demon's forehead protrudes a single horn, the mark of Nergal's rot. Bands of plague-bearers are the most organized and efficient of demons upon the battlefield. It is the plague-bearer's eternal role to herd Nurgle's demonic forces in battle, as well as to keep stock of the diseases, allocate appropriate fates to each new victim, and attempt to maintain order amongst a naturally chaotic horde. Regiments of plague-bearers are surrounded by a constant drone. This thrumming sound is created by the attendant hosts of plump black flies, and by the endless counting, as the demons attempt to calculate their master's ever-changing requirements. A multitude of plague-bearers counting all at once produces a sound so sonorous and penetrating that it is enough to make a mortal feel distinctly unwell. It is all but impossible to tally anything amid the chaos of battle, though this in no way discourages the plague-bearers from their efforts. They are the embodiment of the need of mortal creatures to impose meaning upon an uncaring void. The maggotkin are especially foul, humanoid in shape, but savaged by sickness and hunger. At the center of their being is a grossly distended abdomen, split in places to reveal the gushing organs within and the wriggling maggots that feast on the rot. Resting above this prodigious bulk is a gaunt rib cage covered by thin green or ochre flesh that testifies to their master's nature. Two spindly limbs just barely bear their sack-like bodies, bent by pestilence so virulent it warps the bones. Of all of their features, it is the egg-shaped head perched on a thin neck that's the most disturbing. Its single, large eye situated in the center of its face weeps thick sludge, shadowed by the horn that pierces the cankerous flesh on its brow. Beneath the eye is a wormy mouth, slick with the filth dripping from its rolling eye. It is a thing to be detested, but it is a thing of power. Venerated by the chaos cults of the Lord of Despair, the Tainted Ones are living symbols of Nurgle's blessings, personifying all that the Dark God is. By embracing the nature of these fiends, the cultists learn to accept their own corruptions and grow beyond them. Those few who foolishly stand against the plague-bearers, they learn a terrible lesson about slow, leprous death. The end. The plague drones of Nurgle, known also as the Blighted Swarmers, Festerwings, and the Bubonic Buzzers, are the high-ranking plague bearers of Nergal. These stewards of Nurgle's garden ride into the mortal realm mounted upon rot flies, colossal demon insects whose appearance is so repugnant it leaves festering scars upon the mind. From their lofty positions, the plague drones can properly tally the diseases running rife across the battlefield, as well as swiftly intervene should Nurgle's divine plans meet with heavily armed resistance. The rot flies themselves are amongst Nurgle's most loathsome creations. Some beasts of Nergal, perpetually disappointed by the rag-doll inactivity of their mortal playthings, develop a kernel of bitterness in their ebullient souls. Crestfallen puzzlement leads to frustration and ultimately an aching resentment of the mortals that spurn its company. Over the millennia, a thin seed of malice grows in such a beast's heart, feeding upon depression and angst until it throbs like a cancer at the demon's core. The final straw comes when the beast is betrayed unto death by those it wishes to call its friends. Banished to the realm of chaos by some ingrate's blows, the beast frollops and huffs into a tremendous sulk, its tiny mind gnawed by the knowledge that it cannot return to the mortal domain. This is when the rot fly that lurks within begins to take over. Over the centuries that the beast is bound to remain in the realm of chaos, it slowly pupates, secreting a thick mucus of negativity to protect it from the harsh reality outside. As the chitinous nub of hate that lurks within the beast grows strong on the sallow bulk of its former incarnation, a demonic metamorphosis takes place. Eventually, the creature within bursts out of its fleshy sack as a full-grown rot fly. A creature of pitiless malice, hell-bent on wreaking its revenge upon an uncaring universe. Plague-bearers prize such steeds even above the palanquins of Nurgles, for in their haste to punish the mortals that spurn their larval form, rot flies will speed into battle at great pace. As the rot flies fall upon their prey, blade-sharp legs sink into soft flesh, and leathery wings buzz in a flapping purr of motion. Prehensile probosces and posterior mouthparts latch onto the faces of their victims, and the rot flies let out titters of mean-spirited laughter as they pluck heads from necks and swallow them whole. When facing the unremarkable warriors of the mortal realm, a rot fly will slowly digest all meat from a skull before spitting out a plague-infused death's head that its plague-bearer rider can hurl at the foe. Given the chance, though, rot flies will hunt down the impertinent mortals that slew their previous incarnations. A special fate is reserved for such individuals. Opening their maws wider than physical law should allow, they consume their persecutors whole, keeping them trapped in their mucus-filled abdomens for eternity as punishment. The end. I've been a sewer man for all my life, but I've never seen anything like what I saw down there today. From Gurnek Rausman, an Altdorf sewer jack. The plague toads, also known as the rot eaters or the sewer kin, are among the foulest of demons to inhabit the filthy sewers of the old world. The blackest, filth-choked lagoons and lightless sumps of the Plague Father's realm have served as a spawning ground to all manner of demonic beasts and foul creatures. There, wallowing in the excrement-choked silt of the lake's shoreline, can be found Nurgle's plague toads. They are toad-like bags of brackish filth and pus whose wide maws can swallow a man whole. If disturbed, a plague toad will fight with a determination belied by its lumpen appearance, goring enemies with its slimy horn or using its prehensile tongue to drag victims into its gaping mouth. These semi-sentient demon vermin are, by some reckoning, bloated Nurglings swelled by indulging their appetites and wallowing in the worst noisome decay. Others maintain they are devolved and accursed plague-bearers, punished for their failure to maintain Nergal's tally, thus earning not only their master's ire, but also an even more revolting body in which to while away eternity. In either case, they are victim of the petty abuses and ire of Nergal others get. Legend has it that when the war between the dark gods goes ill, Nergal sets aside his cauldron and concoctions and makes his way down to the lake, there to squash plague toads until the pleasing patterns left by their bile and blackened blood restore his spirits. Finding the first one is easy. Finding others can take some time, as a plague toad is little more than a rubbery bag of skin filled with noisome liquid. The damp squelch it makes when trodden on is easily recognized by other plague toads for miles around. Unsurprisingly, these demons suddenly discover heretofore unknown reserves of urgency in an attempt to find a bolt hole safe from Grandfather Nergal's sight. Little wonder it is, then, that the plague toads escape to the mortal world at the merest opportunity. As well as being dragged along like pestilent flies in the wake of chaos summonings and demonic incursions, these malign demons are drawn to places of disease and decay in the mortal world, such as the dank reaches of sewer pits and stagnant mires, devouring the unwary that cross their path and finding sustenance in suffering and befoulment. It is in such locales as these that those well versed in the lore of the Plague Father can corral the beasts and bind them to their will, offering them the chance to glut their appetites on yet uncorrupted flesh. The end. Until I looked close, I thought his skin was roiling and writhing. Then I saw dozens of tiny demons burrowing through his flesh, gnawing on his bones and suckling upon his vile secretions. All this horror was belied by the beast's cultured voice, which welcomed me as a long-lost son, even as I fell retching to my knees. From the Liber Malefic. The great unclean ones, known also as the Fly Masters, the Stench Lords, Nurgles, Plague Fathers, or simply the Plague Lords, are truly titanic greater demons of Nergal, whose plague and diseases can put low entire armies and can endure the greatest and most horrific punishments that can fell even the mightiest of demonkind. Each is more or less a facsimile of Nergal himself, both physically and in terms of their personality. Indeed, a great unclean one is sometimes referred to as Nergal, or Father Nergal by his underlings, although of course each also has his own demonic name. A great unclean one is invariably a gigantic figure bloated with decay, disease, and all imaginable kinds of physical corruption. The demon's skin is a necrose and leathery surface covered with pockmarks, sores, and other signs of loathsome infestation. His inner organs, rank with decay, spill through the ruptured skin and hang like rotting drapes about an immense girth. From these organs burst tiny pustulant creatures called Nurglings, which chew and suck upon the nauseous juices within. Such foulness echoes the fundamental truth of the universe. Whilst there is life, there will be ruin and decay, even unto the end of all things. In perverse contrast to his horrific appearance, the great unclean one is neither morbid nor consumed with despair. If anything, the opposite is true. Great unclean ones are exuberant in the pursuit of their enthusiasms. Great unclean ones are invariably ebullient and obstreperous, full of a natural will to organize and achieve. Indeed, it is not uncommon for great ones to compete amongst themselves in the matter of spreading Nurgle's plaguesome blessings across the world. Gregarious and curiously sentimental, great unclean ones hold their followers dear and even refer to them as their children. They take great patriarchal pride in the achievements of their fellow creatures, proclaiming vociferously the splendors of the poxes and sores evinced by those around them, and bellow with hearty laughter in response to the destruction wrought in Nurgle's name. The great unclean ones are a massive terror that blends a horrific combination of sheer grotesqueness and rampant decay. They are sinister things, whose affection and corruption evoke shuddering madness from those who witness it. They have no shame, no sense of decency, reveling in the basest acts. Fat, wormy fingers probe the depths of their dripping nostrils. They randomly spray their leavings in great clouds of such pestilential power that the faintest whiff kills. They engorge themselves on food and drinking, spilling their tainted meals out onto the ground through the rents and tears in their prodigious bulk. When not indulging their bestial appetites, they laugh and pinch, coddle and coo their mewling broods of Nurglings. On the battlefield, the great unclean one waddles into the thickest of the fray, muttering such foul jokes that the souls of those who hear them shrivel. It joyously slaughters foes, chortling with disgusting mirth. It might snatch a fleeing warrior to stuff the unfortunate soul into its suppurating maw, only to spray the mostly dissolved carcass in a stream of noxious vomit. In the bodies of its victims bloom the most unsightly monstrosities, and the Fly Master, always patient and endearing towards his spawn, will pause to aid in the birthing of some new unspeakable enemy, or harvest the shoots of fungus and corruption from the twitching dead. The signs of a great unclean one are visible to all, even to those that would deny such a thing could ever stain the world. The air grows heavy and humid, and the very winds seem to slow, laden as they are with the faintest hint of rot, blending the odours of a rotten tooth with the carcass of an animal left too long in the sun. In the folds of clothing, buried in the small clothes beneath armour, in the crevices of the flesh, there is tickling movement as a new maggot is born. Swollen black flies seem to come from nowhere, first individually, then in great swarms. As the demon draws closer, the infestation of flies and maggots spreads. They infest everything, from food to water. Fruits and vegetables ripen on the vines with such speed that they burst, spilling their seeds onto the ground in a syrupy mess of pale slime. Everything blooms and ripens to the perfect moment of harvesting, only to collapse into foul-smelling rot and perversion. And then the great unclean one appears. Its awfulness spreads throughout the land, causing lesions to appear on the flesh and existing cancers, warts and buboes to grow. All that lives gives way to decay and rot, sagging on the vine. Clouds of flies blot out the sun, and the very air dies, filled with the stink of death, and the booming laughter and profane muttering drive those who hear it mad with despair. The greater demons of Nurgle are amongst the most horrific demons known to mortals. Beneath clouds of swarming fly souls, they are almost perfect replicas of Nergal himself, bulbous figures bloated with corruption. Their sickly green skin is little more than a few smooth places between mountainous boils, cavernous wounds, from which spill torrents of chunky pus and fields of quivering blisters. It is a breeding ground for every pox and blight ever to torment the good people of the mortal world. Through the various rents of decayed and ruptured flesh, the internal organs are in full view, pumping corruption throughout its massive bodies, leaking filth and bile over its thick hide, painting it with fresh new contagions to tickle the flesh, and crawling and nuzzling and suckling and hiding on this grotesque thing are swarms of tiny Nurglings, whom the Fly Master sees as his brood. Truly, the great unclean ones represent the inevitable decay and decline of all things. Despite their macabre appearance, the decayed ones have a cheerful disposition, favouring their pets and followers with almost fatherly attention. Between the rancid coos and the constant praises that stream from its seeping maw, its existence is maddening. Great unclean ones take great pride in the achievements of their fellow creatures, loudly celebrating each new affliction, new pox, and new sore with exuberance. When faced with the destruction wrought in Nurgle's name, their booming laughter can be heard for miles. Such love of Nergal and his children breeds a cheerful readiness to fight in his name, for the corpse-strewn battlefield is a fertile garden for new disease and pestilence. The great unclean one sweeps through war at the forefront of a tide of filth and decay, swinging its great flail and splashing all with droplets of corruption. The decayed ones butcher their way through armies with each swing of their mighty arms, as unstoppable as the inevitable march of decline. The appearance of a great unclean one is more than sufficient to unman even the boldest hero. The air sours with its presence, filling it with a pestilential mist that causes the flesh to rebel, infesting all mortals with horrid illnesses that wreak havoc with the body and mind. With each new blast of flatulence, some new plague is born. Each rumbling belch produces legions of virulent diseases, and those unfortunate to face these demons have little hope of living through the encounter. The great unclean one contaminates the earth as much as it does the air. Wherever it goes, it leaves a trail of slippery slime that breeds Nurglings by the thousands. The grass brightens and grows until it can no longer bear the weight of its expanded form. The rocks dissolve, and the earth turns into a soupy morass of excrement and mud. What's worse is that the trail of a stench lord remains for decades, polluting the earth and seeding the land with future calamities for the unwary. Though it is awful to behold and experience, it is far worse to fight. Its dripping hide corrodes the strongest steel, and plumes of acrid smoke and droplets of acidic excretia surround the demon as it wades into the thickest knots of its enemies. And through it all, it disgorges the contents of its vast and often exposed gullet, spewing an unholy combination of entrails, partly digested flesh, wriggling maggots, and its own vile excrement in a torrent that not only burns, but afflicts its victims with the most virulent of all plagues to stalk the lands of men. When a great unclean one addresses his blighted throng, he expostulates in a manner immediately reminiscent of the great leader he is, chivvying and directing his decaying minions with a paternal indulgence at odds with his monstrous appearance. Just as this love of Nergal's creation brings the great unclean one immense joy, he is filled with rage when the petty-minded enemies of chaos try to thwart Nergal's grand designs. Such wrath initially manifests as a thunderous and adjective-laden oratory, declaiming those who question Nergal's will, but swiftly descends into brutal, if still somewhat jovial, violence if the heretic isn't to be cowed by words alone. When roused to battle, a great unclean one is a truly horrifying entity. He bellows ribald joy across the battlefield in stentorian tones, brimming with the jollity of one fulfilling divine commandment, and pauses only to unleash his formidable sorceries against targets ripe for Nergal's blessings. Made ponderous by his colossal bulk, a great unclean one is slow to advance upon the enemy, but is all but unstoppable once he has reached his target. Any foe foolish enough to stray into his path swiftly discovers the immense strength concealed by the greater demon's corpulent form. Whether a plague lord batters his enemy with an iron sword dripping with virulent fluid, or a plague-ridden flail, matters little, for the result is the same: an indescribable mess of blood and bone, already teeming with Nurgle's festering pestilences. The end.